because the universe doesn't exist unless somebody's there to observe it, like the old saying or question paradox. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it actually make a noise? Which sounds kind of pointless, but if you apply it to other situations, it gets really in depth. Like, if you forget some of your memories, then do they ever actually appear again in time? Do they ever exist? If you're the only one to perceive who you are, and something happens to you, then what happens to who you are and were? Where do you go? Where's the ultimate solidity in existence? And but the point is, if your consciousness is malleable, what happens then if you somehow, through a sacred motion, expand your consciousness to see every aspect of what you've been and done and become in the universe? You then become the entirety of existence, and that's the reason behind it. That consciousness is like a balloon, it can go wherever, and so whoever sees it all becomes the creator of it all, but it doesn't mean that they own everything. It means everyone is actually the creator in a state of amnesia, or what's called nescience, where they've forgotten themselves and their true existence. And these charts and diagrams reflect the body and the energy of the mind, because we only have one little triangle or one little piece of it or one little angle, but we're actually in the center seeing the whole thing. Like a light bulb, we're not on the outside of a shadow on the wall, we're the source. But from the mind, we can only partition and see one thing at a time. And then, like I was saying, the people who know this, our whole reality, this whole society is dependent on scarcity. It's dependent on saying we don't have enough. We have to go to war and this, that, and the other, which is the complete opposite of what's actually there. And so then they hide the truth about all of this, even though it's been in plain sight forever. And half of it is to steal and lie and be corrupt, and, give or take half or whatever, and the other is that if people aren't ready for the truth, and they realize it's all a lie, they're going to go apeshit. They're not going to know how to handle it. And then it's weird, because then if it's really, really true, and we can't die because we're consciousness, well then what does it mean about any of this? For instance, if people go apeshit, what does it mean? What's going to happen? Would it be the end, or would it be the beginning of a new age? And then you get the idea that they're hiding it just because in that age, everyone's in power. In this age, only a few guys are in power with all the oil and money and guns and stuff like that. And then you get the idea, it's like, well, what's really right or wrong? And they feel like there's no problem with what they're doing. And the truth is, unless people wake up and say, we have a right to choose for ourselves, and they actually choose and stop buying the shit, then that's the determining factor of right and wrong. It's not whether somebody can complain until they fucking go dry in the brain, and they stand up and handle their own shit. And the point is, with these maps, people can become the co-creators of reality, because they see how the universe works, and that they're a mirror image, or more like an imprint of the entire universe. And all these images have been around since ancient times. And it's the same science behind it. It's a fractal repeating pattern, but it has to have a beginning and an end, an inner and an outer. And that's what gives it that order. Otherwise it just goes on forever and it doesn't make sense. Like if we're in a kaleidoscope that flows like that moving image, that's fun and all, but imagine if you want to go back home. Like you leave Earth and go to one of those other Earths. How do you ever get back to where you were? You have to have a map of the whole thing. And you do that by building that inner key we mentioned before. That the map you have in your mind is the key to going somewhere else on the plane and recording where you went instead of making it just like an endless dream. And that's the center. That's what that star is, going to the center of it. That's how you organize yourself in hyperspace. And without that, it's just like an endless maze. The whole idea of having an inner and an outer, and a certain number of outer points in the central core, and they draw it as people and things like that, because they personify the universe and all that. the idea is all they're doing there is drawing complete, overall, whole map of the universe. And the universe is experience. It's when you get maximal experience and you've done all the things that you've had to do to figure out who you really are. It's not like a location, you go to the gas station and get a map or something like that and drive a certain distance. It's how you feel. And when you've maxed out who you are and what you know you can do. It's an ascension process. And then so they have this view, which is more or less both the trap, the broken version of space, because imagine getting tossed into that and then being like, find your way home. It would be virtually impossible unless you have that inner map, that inner guidance. But as well, that's what is outside of Earth. Not a big empty void, not a thing with one little rock or something like that of life. Everywhere you look, there's life. And it's the only thing you can actually find is one or more parallels. And so then they have the rocket ships and the darkness of space, because it's a show to keep people distracted from realizing everything about scarcity here is the opposite of what is actually taking place. And as well, like I said before, if people knew and they didn't know how to handle it, it would be just like mass insanity. There would be no way to describe what would happen. Because imagine somebody's mind is one of these dots, and we're safe because we're on the outside. The conscious mind has partitioned reality into one particular linear version, but then all of a sudden you open it up and it's like being in a hall of mirrors where there's nothing but versions of you that are separated in these dreamlike occurrences of a continuing just fashion or trend of existence. The single conscious mind would fracture. It would be like a trip. Some people can do it, but can the whole of the world go to work the next day or make shit function and provide food? Because the point is, some people can while out and then be fine, literally like running around the woods butt-ass naked or something. It's like I was gone for 3 days. But can the whole world do that? That would be like lighting everything on fire. It would be the same effect. But if that's what reality really is, so we're in a bind. We're in literally a bind of who knows the truth and who's holding it back for their own power and who's trying to lead people up this ascension path to realize what's actually going on. That we're in a waveform matrix of consciousness that never ends until you give it a beginning and an end. And in that sense, not a beginning and an end, but a general progression from one level to the next in an ordered, hierarchical, uniform pattern, like a storybook, so that it makes sense. Because without that, it's just that end. It's not the same. That end might actually be, or that never-ending thing might actually be death, where we run out of time because we didn't reach the beginning and the end in a particular fashion. But the whole point is that that's what space is actually close to, and they want to tell people it's something quite different. That they've had all these symbols, they're all here, reminding people over and over and over again. This is kind of like an idea behind it. How you have all these particular versions, but it all always centralizes around a single core. And that core essence is what everything else emanates outward from. And as long as you know that core, you can always find your way back to the beginning, or in that sense the end, because the beginning is the end. It's a circle. And when you get to the core of it, okay, well, everything begins from and ends at the same point, because it's a sphere at that point. You see, and that's like that's the corrected version. Just like the star with the guy, and they have a guy in the middle that looks like, one of the early Christ disciples or something. Just a personified version. But that guy is the core of knowledge. It's basically the principles that keep a person a person. Because imagine you go into these various realms and realities, and you become other stuff. That's where stuff gets alien, where experience gets alien and forgetful. But if it centers around core principles, one supreme version of you, which is based upon, say, 8 or 9, yes, 8-pointed star, 8 principal versions or values of your soul energy and essence, then no matter where you go, it would always center around you being the core of the original essence. And that's the pattern. It's just remembering a pattern of what makes you you, and knowing the soul, and keeping that, maintaining that, and becoming immortalized through it. Because then if you can imagine that, we have our pattern. It's like a spacesuit then, where we can jump from plane to plane, reality to reality, we can go anywhere. But without it, people are like stuck. It's literally like needing a spacesuit, otherwise space itself would rip their consciousness apart. It's all about the core values of the soul. And that goes back to the original creation, and the purpose and intention behind it. Just when you handle yourself a certain way, whatever you want to do, you do it, but you respect yourself in that certain way, you don't degrade. But if you go out of that pattern of respect, or whatever it is, and it becomes these other things, drugs, or hate, or desires, or fear, mainly fear, becomes the motivating factor of why a person does what they do, that's not them controlling themselves. And if they follow that path, they become something else. They become something not them. So it's, in eternity, it's like, well, how could we exist forever if we lose ourselves? So it's a map of maintaining the self. And when it's done properly, maintaining the eternal self. There's a method for immortalizing oneself through the soul. In the face of all the weird, bad control system stuff that's going on, and it's the same thing that's always been discussed or focused on. Something I can add to that is that the Creator is immortal, and people are a portion of the overall Creator. And in that sense, when a person awakens to their true essence as the Creator of experience, then they become immortalized in that role of the center of creation. And it can also be said that you're not necessarily a portion, but the physical view is a portion of the whole. But that you are actually one-to-one, wholly the Creator in the center. But that the singular conscious view doesn't add up to that. It's like the little g versus the big G. But in the same sense that the awakened person does miraculously add up to that, but it's not the conscious, egotistical version, because that will always fall short. We can't actually fully grasp our creative capacity as that center point. But if we do, then we're not just ourselves. And so in the same sense, it's like a fan, or like the disco ball projection analogy I give a lot, where we are the part on the outside, but as well we are in the inside. In that sense, we're also all the other parts on the outside. And in the same sense, we're also just the one part and just the Creator part, meaning one-to-one is the actual miraculous whole, meaning one fan blade does equal the whole fan. But in the same sense, one fan blade does add up with all the other fan blades as portions of the whole to then equal the whole fan. It's both. It's like a miracle of existence. So that makes out of reality a kind of game we're playing with ourselves, where we can never fully grasp the entirety of our true essence, yet wherever one looks, all they find is more and more of their true essence, and it's like a never-ending story. But the point is, never-ending, like the flowing star map GIF moving image back there, is one aspect of experience, hyperbolic infinity. However, that's basically lostness, because when it never ends, it means there's really no order to it. There's no function, there's no progression. So the solidity, the meaning, is also found in converting that seemingly endless maze or flow of existence into a progression, an ordered function or progression, which gives rise to more and more of something both new and something structured And in that sense, it's like building the complete view of the whole one true creator, or God, the heart, soul, and mind of God. Even though there is no beginning or end, there is still a function and a meaning to every experience. Because if it was truly just a kaleidoscope, then there would be no meaning. And that's how humanity basically has forgotten their true identity and their order and direction in life, and in essence become lost. And so then the concept behind that is that enough of that will render the soul disconnected from that central point, like a firework or a bottle rocket without the tail, just fizzling out of view, out of wherever, basically out of the fireworks show, like a symphony of the heavenly hosts or something like that. And then in reality, it never goes anywhere because there's just a higher and a lower. But the point is, the lower is often full of suffering or confusion, and the higher is where there is a centralized meaning, and it's really an inner, where the inner of the star is, and the outer, where there's a broken outer of the fan blades, portioned, linear version of consciousness, which is more or less not how things actually are, because it's not happening one after another in pieces. It's one connected whole simultaneity of being, which is actually who we are, which is the whole point behind that.